I had long dreamed of my own house, cozy, but not new, with a soul and history. Little did I know then that the soul within was sinister. When I first crossed the threshold, the floor creaked under my foot as if someone had quietly inhaled behind my neck. In the hallway stood an old wardrobe with dark, worn doors, and on the floor beside it lay rusty nails, as if someone had hastily marked the exits. I thought the previous owners had forgotten to clean up, but that night it turned out to be more than just junk. On my very first evening, a quiet rustling woke me, as if someone was crawling under the floor. I turned on the flashlight and listened. The rustling came from the living room. I pushed the door open, and I hear muffled voices coming from the darkness through the floorboards. A woman's laughter echoing, and someone's hoarse whisper, "Don't go, stay." During the day, I examined the house. In all the door frames, baseboards, and even window frames, I found rusty needles neatly stuck into the wood. On one door frame, I saw an old, faded drawing. A cross crossed out by a circle, with something resembling eyes inside. The more I looked, the clearer I understood. It was a warning sign. That same night, the sounds grew louder. I heard a stomping under the floor, footsteps, unhurried, measured, as if someone was walking around the entire first floor. I lay in bed, pressed my head into the pillow to avoid hearing, and for the first time in many years I couldn't fall asleep. At midnight, all the closet doors slammed shut simultaneously again. I jumped up and saw a ghostly figure through the crack in the door. It stood in the corner of the bedroom, its face hidden by a hood, and in its hands was a dilapidated chest. The chest moved, so much so that I was convinced someone invisible was dragging it straight towards me. I ran over and slammed the closet door. The figure vanished. The chest rattled creakily and fell to the floor. The lid swung open, and a foul odor of decay and old herbs reached me from inside. Something stirred in the depths of the chest, long intertwined roots or human hair? Since then, I've lived here, but every evening I'm afraid to go into the living room. The memory of a black witch living in this house no longer seems like just rumors. I feel her presence in every creak, in every dark corner. And when a quiet laugh echoes at night, I no longer try to understand where it comes from. I just know it's calling me into her world. The nights became unbearable. The rustling turned into scraping, the voices into indistinct muttering that seemed to penetrate directly into my consciousness. I plugged my ears, pulled the blanket over my head, but the feeling of being watched never left me. It felt like cold fingers were touching my cheek in the dark. One night, I woke up gasping for air. It felt like someone was sitting on my chest, pressing me into the bed. I tried to scream, but only a croak escaped my throat. In the dim light, I made out a vague silhouette above me, something shapeless and dark. Fear gripped me. I couldn't move. Gradually, the pressure eased, and I could breathe again. The silhouette vanished, dissolving into the night, but a heavy, musty odor remained in the air, the same one that came from the old chest. I realized I couldn't live like this anymore. This house was devouring me from the inside, slowly driving me mad. I decided to unravel its mystery at all costs, to find a way to get rid of the sinister presence. The next day, I thoroughly examined the living room. Under a floorboard, in the spot where the sounds most often came from, I noticed a loose plank. With difficulty, I managed to pry it open. A small niche yawned beneath the floor. Shining my flashlight into it, I saw several strange items. Dried herbs tied with black thread, bird feathers, burnt-out candles, and something else wrapped in time-darkened fabric. Carefully unwrapping the bundle, I discovered an old, tattered diary written in a clumsy hand. It was the diary of that very witch. The pages were filled with incomprehensible symbols, incantations, and descriptions of dark rituals. Flipping through it, I came across a mention of a hidden treasure, her personal item, containing her power. According to the entries, this treasure was hidden somewhere in the house. My heart beat faster. If I found this object, could I free the house from her evil will? I began searching. Every corner of the house was carefully examined. I looked into the old wardrobe in the hallway, behind the darkened doors. There was nothing but old clothes. The rusty nails lying nearby now seemed not like random debris, but part of some sinister plan. In one of the walls, I felt a loose brick. Behind it, I found a small niche, and in it a small wooden box, bound with tarnished copper. It was locked. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. Could this be the treasure? What should I do next? Try to force the box open, or look for a key? And what will happen when I open it? The wooden box in my hands felt icy cold, despite the stuffiness of the room. The tarnished copper gleamed dully in the light of the trembling lamp, as if winking with a sinister secret. I shook it, something clinked dully inside, making my heart clench painfully. Treasure? I whispered into the emptiness of the room, and the echo of my voice immediately dissolved into the ominous silence. This wasn't treasure, but rather a tomb of something dark and ancient. I looked around. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to thicken, becoming denser. A floorboard creaked in the living room, the place I tried to avoid after that night with the chest. A quiet laugh, so familiar and chilling, barely audibly reached me from behind the door. It was calling. It always called. But now I had a key, or at least I thought I did. This cold box, found behind the loose brick, seemed like the answer to all my nightmares. But what if this wasn't the end, but only the beginning of something even more terrible? I found an old rusty nail among the clutter on the floor. Grasping it with pliers, I tried to pick the lock. The metal scraped against the wood with a sickening sound. Finally, with a dull click, the lock gave way. The lid opened slowly, as if reluctantly releasing its sinister secret. Inside, on a darkened velvet lining, lay not a precious stone and not gold. There rested a strand of tangled gray hair, tied with black thread. Beside it lay a dried bird's eye, cloudy and empty, staring directly at me. As soon as I saw it, the air in the room instantly grew cold. The smell of decay and old herbs became unbearably strong, constricting my throat. The shadows around me stirred, taking on vague outlines. From the living room came not a quiet laugh anymore, but a horrifying, triumphant cackle. It was approaching, growing louder, filling the entire space. I felt someone's icy breath on the back of my neck. Slowly turning around, I saw her, a ghostly figure, its face hidden by a deep hood. In her bony hand gleamed that same rusty needle I had found everywhere in the house. Her silent smirk pierced me with icy terror. I understood. The box wasn't the key to my salvation. It was the key to her return. And now she was here, with me, forever. The quiet laughter ceased. Only an icy silence remained and her piercing, invisible gaze. The needle slowly rose. The needle gleamed in the dim lamplight, descending lower and lower. I don't know what happened. Was that sign a protection left by previous residents? Or was something else fighting the Black Witch for this house? One thing I knew for sure, she was gone. But despite the sudden deliverance, the fear remained. It settled deep inside, a reminder of what I had seen and felt. Now every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind outside the window made me flinch. I still live in this house. It no longer feels sinister, but it can't be called cozy either. It remains silent, as if tired from the horror it had witnessed. Sometimes, on the quietest nights, I think I catch a faint, barely audible whisper. But now it's not a call. Rather, it's the echo of a past nightmare. I know I will never forget what happened here. The house with a soul and history turned out to be a house with a curse. And I was the one who accidentally awakened it. Now I live here, always on guard, listening to the silence. Because I know sometimes silence can be deceiving. And in the darkest corners, the shadows of the past may lurk, ready to return. The silence that followed her vanishing was heavy, a stark contrast to the cacophony of dread that had permeated the house since my arrival. It was the kind of silence that hums with unspoken tension, the lull before another storm, or perhaps the quiet aftermath of a battle-hard one. I didn't know which it was, and the uncertainty was almost as unsettling as the spectral presence had been. I remained standing, the small wooden box still clutched in my hand. It no longer felt cold, but carried a strange lightness, as if whatever dark energy had clung to it was now gone. The strand of gray hair and the dried birds I within seemed inert, relics of a nightmare that had, for now, receded. Slowly, cautiously, I moved. My legs felt stiff, unused to such stillness in the house. The air was clearer. The oppressive weight that had settled over everything had lifted. I walked into the living room, the place I had come to fear the most. The floorboards didn't creak with unseen footsteps. The air wasn't thick with a malevolent presence. It was just a room, filled with my meager belongings and the dust motes dancing in the faint moonlight filtering through the grimy windows. I found myself drawn to the corner where the ghostly figure had appeared with the chest. There was no lingering chill, no trace of her presence. Only the faint outline on the dusty floor where the heavy chest had rested. I knelt down, tracing the mark with my fingers. What had been inside that chest, besides the hair and the eye? What other remnants of the Black Witch's life were hidden within these walls? The crossed out in the circle, I remembered seeing it on the door frame. I went back to the hallway and found it, still faintly visible on the aged wood. It was a simple symbol, yet it had radiated a power strong enough to banish the apparition. Who had carved it and why? Was it meant as a ward against the witch? A protective sigil that had lain dormant until her power became too strong? These questions swirled in my mind, replacing the immediate terror with a more contemplative unease. The house was quiet, but it still held secrets, whispered echoes of a dark past. Could I truly rest here, knowing what had transpired? Could I ever feel safe again within these walls? Days turned into a tentative sort of normalcy. The nights were silent. The shadows in the corners remained just shadows. I started to clean the house, scrubbing away the grime and dust, trying to erase the physical remnants of the oppressive atmosphere. I aired out the rooms, letting in the weak autumn sunlight. Yet the memory lingered. The chilling laughter, the icy touch, the sight of the hooded figure, these were etched into my mind, a constant reminder of the malevolence that had resided here. I found myself constantly listening, my senses hyper-alert to any unusual sound. Every creak of the old house still made my heart jump. I tried to learn more about the history of the house. The local library had some old records, but they were sparse. The house was old, built in the late 19th century. There was no mention of a witch, only the names of previous owners, ordinary families who had lived and died within its walls. This made the recent events even more unsettling. Had the witch's presence lain dormant for decades, only to be awakened by my arrival? One afternoon, while cleaning the attic, I found a small, leather-bound book hidden beneath a loose floorboard. It was another journal, its pages brittle with age. The handwriting was different from the first one I had found. This one belonged to a woman named Alara, who had lived in the house in the early 20th century. Her entries spoke of strange occurrences, unsettling feelings, and a growing sense of dread within the house. She wrote of unexplained noises, of objects moving on their own, and of a cold presence that she felt watching her. Her descriptions eerily mirrored my own experiences. Then her entries took a darker turn. She wrote of nightmares, of feeling suffocated in her sleep, and of a voice whispering in the darkness, urging her to stay. She also mentioned finding strange symbols carved into the woodwork, including the Perchorknuti crest in the circle. Alara's journal detailed her attempts to understand and combat the evil in the house. She researched local folklore, consulted with a village elder, and learned about protective symbols and rituals. The crossed out, she wrote, was an ancient ward against malevolent spirits, a symbol of binding and banishment. Her final entries were filled with fear and a sense of resignation. She felt the presence growing stronger, her efforts to ward it off failing. The last entry simply read, "It's getting closer. I can't fight it anymore." Alara's journal provided some answers, but it also deepened the mystery. The witch had been here for a long time, tormenting the inhabitants of the house for generations. Alara had tried to fight it, and perhaps her efforts had weakened the entity, laying dormant until I unknowingly stirred it again. And the Perchorknutik graced, perhaps Alara herself had carved it, a desperate attempt to protect herself. The discovery of Alara's journal gave me a sense of grim determination. She had fought. I had, in a way, also fought, and the entity had been banished, at least for now. But the house still felt charged. The echoes of the past were too strong to ignore. I decided I couldn't stay here. The peace was fragile, and the memories were too vivid. I put the house up for sale. The real estate agent looked at me strangely when I mentioned the house's unique history. I glossed over the details, simply saying it wasn't the right fit for me. While waiting for a buyer, I continued to explore the house, driven by a need to understand what I had faced. I found more of the rusty needles, hidden in crevices and behind loose panels. They seemed deliberately placed like markers or anchors for the entity's power. I also found more of Alara's carvings, small Perchorknutik Restu etched into windowsills and under floorboards. She had tried to protect every part of the house. One evening, as dusk fell, I was in the living room, packing some of my belongings. A faint whisper brushed against my ear. "Don't go!" My blood ran cold. I whirled around, but the room was empty. The whisper was faint, almost a figment of my imagination, but it carried the same chilling quality as before. Had it returned? Was the banishment only temporary? Fear gripped me again, stronger this time, tinged with a sense of utter weariness. Could I ever truly escape this house? I spent the rest of the night in a state of anxious alertness, every shadow seeming to writhe, every creak of the old wood sounding like an approaching footstep. But nothing else happened. The morning light brought a fragile sense of relief. A few weeks later, the house was sold. A young couple, eager to own a place with character, signed the papers. I didn't tell them about the black witch or the ghostly figure. I couldn't bring myself to burden them with my nightmare. I only hoped that Alara's wards would continue to protect them, or that the entity was truly gone. As I drove away from the house for the last time, I looked back at its familiar silhouette against the twilight sky. It looked peaceful, ordinary, but I knew the truth. Beneath the surface of its aged charm lay a history of darkness, a silent testament to a battle fought and perhaps only temporarily won. I carried the memory with me, a chilling reminder that not all old houses hold cozy souls. Some hold something far more sinister, something that lingers in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to whisper, "Stay." And sometimes, even when you leave, a part of you remains, forever listening for that whisper in the quiet corners of your mind. The peace I sought in a home with history had come at a terrible price, a haunting that would likely stay with me longer than any mortgage or deed. The house was no longer mine, but its terror, I suspected, would always be.